The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Beverly Ryan is an artist and art educator. She has been teaching art appreciation classes at Montgomery College as an adjunct since 2007. Ryan also teaches painting at the Art League School in Alexandria, Virginia. Courses there include abstract painting, beyond the tangible, developing the narrative, and workshops in encaustic painting. Ryan has been a professional painter since the early 1990s, showing locally, regionally, and internationally. Her works are in many private and corporate collections. She has been a resident artist at the Torpedo Factory Art Center, Alexandria, Virginia, since 2001. Her work can be found at beverlyryan.com.
Hello, thank you for coming. This is exciting to finally get to share our projects with you. The title of mine is American Identity, Native American Cultures, and the Columbian Exchange. I teach various sections of Art 127, or Art Appreciation, and I decided to implement this with two classes. So Art Appreciation is a general education course, and it introduces students to visual art media, visual elements, principles of design, art criticism, survey of art history. It's a little bit everything, soup to nuts in this class. I chose to have a two-pronged approach for this. I really wanted to connect a theme to art, and I had my heart set on using the Indian Museum. But we started with the American identity in the past and today as one part, and the second part, for the second part of the semester, was Native American cultures, their ethnographic objects, and the Columbian Exchange. So we'll start with part one. This culminated, this idea, in a field trip on September 27th to the National Portrait Gallery. Before we went there, we talked about the importance of portraiture and painting and that sort of background information about the art connection. And they were assigned a portrait from the American Origins exhibit. I went there ahead of time and picked out particular people who I thought gave a wide range. We had American Indians, and we had Africans, and we had Europeans, and we had men and women, so that we would get a variety. So they researched the portrait. They each had one. And then at the museum, each student was required to act as a docent for their portrait. And they shared the six-word memoirs. The six-word memoirs was a exercise that Sarah and Mimi led us in, where they can kind of concentrate who the person is in 6 words. And they really liked that, and they did many of them, and then they chose one to share. So on September 27th, 48 of us descended upon the American Origins exhibit. I had invited them to bring family and friends, and they did, and I have big classes. So I have a couple pictures here of the group, and we dominated that exhibit. Nobody could get around us or through us, and people began to follow us, actually. This particular image is a young woman in blue talking about a portrait of a woman painter. She was particularly excited to see that these portraits were actually handmade by people, that they were the real deal, that hadn't occurred to her. One thing that was very nice was that all the students took this seriously. I had only 2 not show up, and they had jobs. And they went on their own, but they did a good presentation, and the audience was respectful, and they clapped for each other, and they were a good audience to each other. Go ahead. And here's another crowd shot. It was an exciting day. Okay, the next thing we did was we went up to the top floor and looked at the 20th century portraits. This is Toni Morrison, and my students posed in front of it nicely. and they saw the LL Cool J portraits, and then they went over to the American Art Museum to see some contemporary artwork. I gave them an extra credit assignment to choose anything in the museum and write a little paragraph about it later, and they actually went ahead and did 6-word memoirs for that too, and I hadn't even asked them to. So this is Toni Morrison's portrait. Okay, following that, the larger part of the assignment was to create an artwork, and this is not a studio class, so it kind of catches them off guard a bit, about an American that you know. So it's bringing American identity from the past to the present. So each student created a self-portrait or a portrait of a family member or a friend, and I allowed them to choose drawing, painting, a photograph, or a collage. And we talked about some of these media in class before we did this. With the portraits, they submitted a paragraph. There were a lot of little writing assignments through the semester, way more than I think they expected. But I wanted to know how they reacted, and that's the best way to do it. So they submitted a paragraph describing that person's American experience with it. And these were very interesting to me. I've taught for 7 years, 8 years, and it's probably the first semester I really got a little bit more personal knowledge about my students, and that made it come alive for me as well for them. So, okay, this first one was a beautiful drawing. This is a student who came from Togo. This is her sister, and many of these were tributes to parents or relatives that had made sacrifices to help them get to Montgomery College. And her sister studied nursing here, but she wrote a paragraph about how she suffered loneliness and felt disconnected when she first came, and then she applied herself to getting her nurse's degree, and then she helped bring her younger sister, who was my student, here. This one is a self-portrait, a photograph, a young man who was quite a good writer, and I want to share what he wrote with this, because I thought it was, he took it seriously, it was clever. He calls it Views from the Bottom. When men like me first came to this country, we were nameless, faceless chattel. Strangers, fathers, husbands, brothers, no more. But we survived, we adapted, we assimilated. Portrayed with pigment on canvas or paper, garbed as men who have accomplished much, we, they, I defy stereotypes. LL Cool J and Frederick Douglass sit for portraits larger than life to record for posterity, not the trials and tribulations, but the resilience of Black men. I stand apart, cold under the white man's sun, ragged in his ghettos, shod for my own journey as a college student and free, a college man and free. A coat to protect me from icy oppression, and boots to trample failure as I trod through the concrete jungles of America. Next one. Okay, you can go ahead. That was what I just read. You don't want to read that again. Another student created a collage of a grandfather, and what she wrote was, my grandfather's American experience was to grow up going to high quality schools, getting a good job, getting married, having children, and becoming a grandparent, and living the American dream of becoming a farmer in his retirement. And that's that repeated. You can go ahead. We had a very informal exhibit of these in the classroom. I had each classes on display for a few days, and so that they could share and see each other's work. Okay, the second part was about Native American cultures in the Columbian Exchange. First of all, before we went to the museum, we had class lectures on crafts as art, on art history of the Americas, and some information about the Columbian Exchange, just to set the groundwork. I also invited a guest speaker from the National Museum of the American Indian, Dr. Douglas Herman, and he came on October 8th and spoke to my classes as well as the whole campus, and Sarah was nice enough to get us a larger room, and we made the invitation open to everyone in the on campus, and Dr. Herman spoke on the topic, "Where are the Indians?" Here he is. He was very gracious to give this talk twice. My classes are 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning. Next one. And here's a shot of the students. And they were quite surprised. They really didn't know the story of the Native Americans and what happened with the Columbian exchange. Okay, so still before we went to the museum, they were required to write a summary of his lecture. And that's where I found out just how surprised they were about the outcome of the what happened to the cultures. And then they were also required to do an online small research project at the museum website. And I wanted them to find several things: specific American cultures, their ethnographic objects to make the art connection with this study, and to look at materials that were used and techniques that were used to make the objects. And I had them try to enter the website in different ways to find this information out ahead of time. So go ahead. On October 18th, we went to National Museum of American Indian, and I set it up like scavenger hunt, sort of. They had a list of things that they needed to cover. We started with the movie in the Lalawi Theater. They went to the exhibit called Our Universes and were each assigned a culture that they needed to take notes on there. They were sent to the kiosks on the first floor, which Sal mentioned, which are great, interactive, to research at least 3 stories about early contacts with the Europeans. And then they were to find objects in the Windows on Cultures exhibit and the Ceramica de los Ancestros exhibits. So we all met and we started out at the movie, and then they all scattered and did their research. I invited them to join me at the Mitzitam Cafe, and I had about 5 takers. We ate some unidentified food, had a good time. Okay. Here's a group in front of the Windows on Cultures exhibit, which has beautiful handmade items and a lot of information about one of my favorite parts of the museum. Here are 2 girls up by the Lalawi Theater, and they were checking out the artifacts or the craft objects in the cases. And here are 4 young men in front of the kiosks down on the first floor in the main entrance area. And then after this exhibit, or after this trip, they were to write a summary of their visit, and I found out that the movie was a favorite. Everybody loved that movie. And in fact, one or 2 of them went back and saw it a second time. They were also to write a pretty detailed summary of their assigned culture from the Our Universes exhibit. Also, all the time I'm asking them to write about objects that are made by the people. Okay. Then I had scheduled a 3rd exhibit, and I started to think maybe I was overwhelming them. So I made this one extra credit. So on November 1st, I did the same kind of plan as I gave them a list of things that they were supposed to check out. And one of them was the Our Lives exhibit, which I think Sal's group went, which is contemporary Indian culture life. I sent them to the Roanoke store to look at the craft objects. And they have lots of little information cards, so they were supposed to pick up information about the culture and how the things were made. They attended a curator-guided tour of the ceramic exhibit, which was a fabulous opportunity. And then we participated in the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos celebration, which took over the whole museum, and they enjoyed that very much. The follow-up assignment was to write a summary about the celebration, the Day of the Dead celebration in particular, and their trip. Okay, picture. This is a young woman who, I think her family came from El Salvador, and she brought her mother both times, and I got to meet parents and siblings. It was a good thing. And this is one of the ofrendas, the altars for the Day of the Dead. And these 2 young men are on the balcony above the big open atrium area where they had another giant altar and many dance troupes performed. Now, the final project was to create a PowerPoint presentation and a report. This just went on and on and on for them. They had to choose one Native American culture, which they could have written about before, and its artworks. And then they were to supplement the research they had done at the museum. And then gave a 5-minute PowerPoint presentation, which I asked them to include the following information, describe their culture and some of the customs, give us a little bit of history related to the Columbian exchange. And I'm talking about early encounters, early changes with the cultures, and then to find, I think I said 3 ethnographic objects, have images of those and tell us how they were made, why they were made, what they were used for. So I have a few pictures of these presentations. They were very comfortable with PowerPoint, probably more than me, more than I. Okay, go ahead. Okay, and I'd like to share some quotes with you, which I think I have to read from up here. I thought the museum trips were a wonderful experience because they were engaging and we were able to apply what we learned in our class to our trips. Another student said this was the most impactful part of the class. It helped me gather more sense of different cultures because it was a visual perspective that was much more realistic than seeing bullet points on PowerPoint slides. This was all from one student, and her family came with her. At first, I was nervous about going to Washington, D.C. by myself on the metro, but I managed to go with some of my friends and family. I took my younger siblings, and they also learned from and enjoyed the museum. I would love for my other professors at Montgomery College to incorporate Smithsonian museums in their curriculum. It gives me another way to perceive different cultures and their values. Also, it was my first time to visit the Smithsonian museums, and that was true for many of the students. And I like the fact that there is free access. Just yesterday, I invited my friend to go to a Smithsonian museum with me on the weekend, as I am eager to share what I've learned on my trips to the Smithsonian this semester. Outcomes. I had engaged students. I have students who are now comfortable visiting the learning environment of a museum when they were frightened of that before. And I had the students connecting with each other because we're not a residential college and they frequently don't connect. And then a teacher, and that would be me, who will include Smithsonian Museum visits in my curriculum forever. Thank you.